1 minute over 1 over tractions to get in signal. 60 seconds. It took line direct signals to get 1 provision lines of cycles, 1 volume, 1 traction, 1 0, 1 gravity, directing all modification grounds. Okay, knowing exactly how to use our telepathies. It set lines all communication lines of balance and tractions. So we have to understand how to work with that and lines of clocking system and communication system. Coming into that line is all about telepathy. Now, telepathy basically puts everything in programming. Programming our system location of travels, understand acceleration of our line, and direct lines of communication system. So in Lines of Course Centers, Daryl's put up a lot of videos for everybody because they have to understand what's really going on with their tractions. It's all in its relation system, right? When we understand how to use it through the frequencies that we are. And the more we understand that, every time you get up in a 24 cycle, everything just high rises faster and faster. Now we're getting out of time's continuance and we're coming into the AVR system, the virtual realities. Your thoughts, your action, your emotions are actually turning into quantum communication system. They're coming in track lines into light switches. The light switches are going to be offline screen. Now it's a direct lines into 60,000 lines of perimeters and parameters over lines over box over frame and position of track lines communicate to its high sending position to its operation surface. Retracking core line settings, setting lines of 10,000 lines of high center interference, resetting position of programs and satellites and towers and communication lines of modem, directing lines of your Wi-Fi, process the bandwidth, core standard lines of streaming, directing lines of planetary service, sets the lines of communication to its system, processing communication setting. So I'll say this again. Setting communication lines, high center interference, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, track communication setting will be in the AVR system of the simulators. Each thought will be in its perimeter and parameter and security lines of panels. Its process communication setting to over lines of sequence. In communication lines to default, directing lines into general settings. This process communicates to its binary that overrides its sequence and line communication to its setting. Lacing lines, communication lines of high center interference, travel in-line rotation surface interactions, directing in modification lines. Now, understand how the VR is set up is understanding patterns of behavior. If you ever played a game, everything has a structure of a pattern. The only difference is you're going to be in the VR line, which basically you're moving. Okay, you're not standing still and the background's moving. Okay, so that's what it is. 2,000 line signals, 0 gravity line position location of 2 measure, scales its communication lines of 5 is sequence. The balance communication is a heart line. The core lines is the bypass, position lines of tractions, directed lines and code lines of signals of blue and red, and track lines of high center interference, line direct signals in holographic screen lines, adaptation, high travels, endpoint lines, communications, and gravitation. Process in that communications puts everything in tracking of balance. Balancing your signals puts all communication in your clock into the foundation grounds. Now the team is in center, in core center's line communication system. The higher they go through frequency, the more they see the command ships. And that's all it is in tractions. So setting lines at January 1st, process communication lines of high direct signals getting out of foundation grounds. So there'll be no more 12-line sequence and calendars. There'll be no more day, no month, no year, no past, no present, no future. You'll be in the 0 lines of high center interference of no space, no time. Processing that, you have to understand the acceleration of time sequence, time editing, time balancing your system, and how you see your communications to your frequencies. There's 12 foundation grounds, okay, in line screen adaptations. And what you understand, they've always come to existence, but now they're coming into their existing of their panel. They're sitting at their hotel. They're sitting at their golf, their tango. Now this process them in communication settings. So they have a right to be in a position location where they've already been in attractions, where they set up their data ports, the communication setting, the command ships, and command portals, direct lines of stargates, star portals, star command ships, directing in modification grounds, motherships, line communication, interstellar ships, core ships. There's going to be lines, core sending locations into setting lines of 40 feet, 60 feet, 80 feet, 100 feet. Once we get into an I-line screen, that adaptation location of 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet, just sitting in the skyline. Now, coming into those frequencies is really understand how to work with that in tractions, how to understand the width, understand the operation of all those, remembering your knowledge, your work ethic, your direct signals, and how to get indirect and redirect. So that's the process how we get into the actual VR system. Leaving the sequence lines of time's continuance out of timeline puts all process communication, everything happening all at once. Okay, guys, that's all those instructions. Now getting into the foundations, you come in sequence. Ancestry, history, and celestial. You don't know where you're going until you know where you've been, right? So that's a process that everybody's coming in track lines. The avatar is taking over the body line and frequency. Okay, I told you to get ready in travels. Okay, direct lines of sites. We have platitude lines, core center lines of 3 planets and tractions, 1, 2, and 3 lines of measure. 3 planets, right? Directing lines XT1000, XT1, and a mothership and travel communications. 3 lines of signals, process lines of 1, process lines of 6, and process lines of 8 in track locations. Directing lines of course centers, line signals, in line communication, earth line. Habits, imitation zone lines, attraction centers, and operation service. Process communication setting, all through tractions. Directing lines of course centers, directing in modifications, frequencies are way too high. Got to bring down the frequency line grounds into course centers of travel endpoint lines of communications. All right, so we got an XT line, set of course centers into XT flux. Remember, they change on a 4-line cycle. 4 lines of system, 4 line divisions, and 4 calculation setting. So, like I said, in line track locations, it takes 3 minutes for a mothership to change its correlation lines of track interference into geometric lines of shape because it's an I-line itself, but it takes 3 years in track lines to actually shape and shift. Directing line signals to acceleration and Mach, setting course centers and marking setting, mocking 1 division location setting to X line charge, directing lines XT platform, fluxes over line in screen lines of Y line screen, directing lines XT1000 platitudes line screen adaptations of processing, and center communication to its operation surface and track locations. Okay. So that's how things are going to be set up in 2025, right? 3 central lines of 3 settings, process lines of 3/6, laser tractions, line communication system. What are we coming in track lines? Skynet. Okay, so we had ground line service. This routes the calculation screen locations. Okay, process lines, downshift cross locations into galaxy shift lines and console, interstellar mode. We go through spectrum core lines and oscillations. Now, direct lines of panels, process communication setting and grounds, center communication system, open lines of sequence, line screen line adaptation surface and track locations. Okay, process lines of indication, process lines of signals. Line direct signals. Now the ground lines inhibitors of our line has earth line tractions, has direct signals and ground standard lines of surface and track locations. Okay. Then we go through the center communication, high center locations and settings. 45 split lines of anomaly right over left and tractions. Oh, look at that, disappeared. See it in tractions? There it is, right? Then we go to the opposite side. Okay. Setting up a flux screen and line direct signals into modification grounds, overcross line condition setting, inhibitors and screen lines adaptations, surface and tractions. Okay, see it? Intelligence, information ground line communications, all right? All right, so we set core lines, indirect signals in a 45 line split line communication system with console, directing in communication centers of travels. Direct lines of panels in a 40 line, 3 line, 4 line signals in graph communication system, laser tractions, ABR line rotation surface and traction. Okay. Okay, so we process that and we have a direct lines of communications. Off signal, off router, line conditions, satellites and rotors. Rotates the system and travel. All right, so basically it's just trying to understand what's going on with the mind line at the conceptual location of acceleration line. So we had a V line rotation. Process lines, let's go into run sequence. Now I need the team to get in position lines of high centers, short lines and high center variance, into ground lines of surface and track locations. Process line inception over 1, and process line over core line center in calculations on levels. Exceptional lines and expansion settings, process line signature panel. Process lines alpha, delta, and theta communication setting and travel. Sets core lines of channels, operate the service at position of center. Sets communication high set correlates center energetic line rotation surface and tractions. Directing core line centers, relays, atmosphere line change, process lines of 3 lines of cycles into an XT1000 platform. Directing lines of modification ground, symbolism lines of track centers. Process lines of platform 1, in position lines of high center, process line, equal lines of half location setting of scenting. Set lines of high center for sentient, that process lines of 2 platforms of communication setting. Sapiens and tractions, Palladians, Palladians, and line rotation surface and track locations. Directing communication lines of grounds, symbolism lines of data, process lines of mapping sequence. Communication high center locations, sending cross line signals into high communication system of Saturn and tractions. Saturn. Okay, guys? All right. So I know exactly acceleration lines of screen is direct lines of modification grounds. Sets communication high centers. Now we go to the X lines of 1. X line equal lines of Y. Y correlation setting into Y. Equal location lines equals lines of Z in track locations. Now Z lines has a zoning commission directing lines into data information lines, high interference and docile, core lines into documentation system, into calculation setting. Signature panels, process calculation lines 007. Bracket communication center lines of surface. Upswing process calculation lines into E tracks, E factors over line, and hieroglyphics. Communication ground lines, symbolism lines, X lines of 1, process lines of platform, process lines of center, process lines of surface, and process lines magnetic. Is set in a 4 tubing track location of setting positions. Mothership comes in, crossing line signals into panel operation surface and track locations. Okay. Overline signals in communication lines into flux. Process communication setting and travel. Okay. So mothership sets the tone, directing signals lines of 0, process lines of platforms over lines over Z over 1 over factor. That communicates the ground lines of surface over cross location screens, into inhibitors over screen, adaptations lines of flux over screen. Now we go through the ground line service, D lines of tractions, flux over line, 45 split lines of anomaly, 4 centers, 4 communication surface and track locations. Very complicated stuff, but a lot of fun. Ground line symbolism, cross location lines, and data process location of sheet lines. Now that communicates lines, the alpha line, let's go into bold screens. Alpha line, we go into delta, and we go into 3-line communication setting and high interference omega and traction. Waving screens, directing signals. Look at that, disappeared. I have to put it on again, right? See? It disappears. The energy is too fast, too strong for you guys not to understand through location of frequencies. Is it there through traction? Yes, it is. All right. Okay, so we ground the grids, process lines of center, process lines of surface, and process lines of measure and command shifts and direct signals in modification ground lines of surface and tractions. Oh, too fast. Let's bring it in line, position location to setting, sets communication high center interference, timeline sequence and time calculations. Oh, not there again. See, it's going too fast. You got to catch the wind cycles, line communication setting to the oscillation wind factors. Nope. Let's do it again. See, I'm doing it 4 times and you still can't catch it because it's going too fast. There it is. Done. All right. So the more you provision the cycles, the more you see lacing lines. Now, a lacing line has a floater communication high direct signals that modifies the sys location of travels. That's 18 lines of measure. Process lines of 10 over sequence, X lines of 1. Okay. 1 signal lines, 1 ground centers, service location setting is solar generation screen adaptation of service location, high center location setting, and calculate modify through set position. All right. Stargate portal sets line signals, process communication system, and travel. Okay. Now, direct lines of panels has an 8-line division. Now, that's core centers lines of X lines, process lines of box frame, and position lines, calculate and modify, core centers lines of travels, also in flux of communication. All right. Change communication grounds, symbolism lines of track interference. All right. Open sequence, open panels, Stargate measure, Stargate portals, Stargate communication system, all through set calculation lines of AVR. Directing set lines, high core centers, line communication setting into a position of perimeters, parameters, and skyline. Sky grid panels, process lines of signals, line communication setting, all process in communication system, all through Pluto and direct signals and modification. Pluto. All right, so that's set up in tractions. So basically, setting the operation lines of service predetermines everything in location system, taken out of times continuum. All right, T equals lines in C equals lines of R equals lines of T, and track locations, right? Tractions, communication, ground lines, relays, process lines, solar sails, processing, communication, ground lines of surface. Sets communication high lines of flux over line and direct signals, process lines that indicate the system, seed potting, point lines of graphs, sync lines, course centers, and travels, in communication system and symbolism. Communicates high center location cross-line connection system, all through open lines of pi. Process communication ground line service. We go on angle points, center line position, center communication off calculation lines, inner line position location of travels, indirect lines, high center interference, and Neptune and traction. Neptune. Okay, elongated screen, directing lines, high course lines, communication setting, flux over screen, energetic line screen adaptations of process calculation setting, energetic domes. Nope, it's not there. Let's bring it back in set position. Is it there in tractions? Yes, it is. All right. Then we go through the orb line screen, detecting high center interference and probing communication lines and grounds, power restriction of timelines, flux over line, directing signals in modification ground center location, another similar lines of energy line, platforms A, B, and C, and cerebro. Cortex line division location assisting cross-line communication lines and command ships, process line direct signals and flux over lines, and set position lines of travel. Done by equation. How do you set these things up, perimeters and parameters, guys? It's all lines of a V line. It rotates the system and travels. Like lines of 12 lines of foundation equals lines of command ships equals lines of mothership. Now, mothership, mother load. Directing lines course centers into metric cores, metric meters, metric scales, metric balance. Metric core lines communicates the system. The line conditions the motherboard. Directing lines in the mine modification system into A lines course centers into AVR system locations in routes and routers and teleportation, telewaving, telecommunication, high center interference, code waving track lines and high center location system all through track location. All right, guys, it's all set up. Okay, coming out signal, we have 1x2000 platitude crossing line in lines in line position, right? Process inside center communications, directing lines of calculation, sending to streams. All right, calculate modify setting and portal screen, going in the opposite direct signals into the line position locations. Half piping around signal, cross lines, and exhibit lines to S line rotation surface and track locations. Now, then that communication lines crosses outline signal in rotation surface into the sun that modifies the system all through travel. Sets communication lines and half pipe and line screen adaptation of surface and track location to its setting. Okay, that's how it's all set up. Very complicated, but you better understand what's going on through tractions, right? Okay. As that's set up, we take the half pipe. Okay, so that's 1/2 line equals lines 1/3 in line position locations into 24 sequence times sequence lines of box. Box lines of high center interference, that's 23. We go into line equals lines in crypto. Now the crypto line screen adaptations in high centers. Process communication lines of box lines equals lines of chain. Blocking chain of 3 triangulation line position programs, directing lines of 3 over communication sending lines of surface. Okay, so we set in E factors. We set out a vacuum. The vacuum sets lines of velocity and center communication lines of direct signals and ground center location of surface. Process communication heights, calculation lines of A tracks, set lines of 7 lines of E track location to its setting. Process line communication system, all calculate and modify. 3 ground lines service and 3 lines of indication system, all through processing. Okay. E tracks, directing lines of 1, symbolism, line cross locations, laser traction, line direct signals. Process lines of 1, in-line position location of system, all through track location of Jupiter. All right. I'm going to do it again. There's Jupiter and track locations. All right. All right, directing lines, core lines, XT1001, XT1002, XT1003, and mothership of 4 and track locations. Okay, now, how this is set up is all through 12 measure. The scales communication lines of 0, 0, and 0 on tractions. Open 3 window frames, 3 lines of signals, 3 lines of grounds, and 3 lines of travel, direct signal. Process lines over line sequence, mothership 1, mothership 2, mothership 3, and mothership 12, and set position lines of travel. It's all through calculation setting. Laser grids, center core system line condition setting, wall dividers, and rotation surface attractions. Setting core lines direct signals and planet service into equals lines of meters, scales, and balance. Platitude lines and position lines of 4 track location of planets. Process lines of grounds and line communication system all through surface and track locations. Now, crossing lines angles sets lines communication setting and program. Okay, so we got the L track, directing lines of course centers into line screen. Communicate the high center location setting in line screen adaptation to a system all through tractions. All right. Interstellar mode and communication. All through locations of intelligence. All right. Now, getting grounds, we get in line screen back and position location of its half pipe. Now, the half pipe signalizes the rotation setting and track correlation system at 2 track positions. Process lines of indication setting in position line centers, line condition setting that opens all sequence and track communication system. Okay, look at that. Travel too fast, couldn't see line position, right? So this takes out all symbolism lines of course centers, putting communication lines of flux over line, energetic lines of patterns in Mercury and track locations. Mercury. Okay. Okay. So understanding core centers as 12 lines of measure that scales communication line high center interference. So we have alpha waves in lines of box, flux over line, and data process lines of 2 track locations. Now that symbolism lines of core centers, XT1000 comes out through position and track location lines, direct signals, modification grounds. Now, we'll go through the location grid and setting calculations, right? Directing lines across line signals into 4 lines of flux in the screen. Process lines of 1, 3 lines of signals, 4 lines of measure and scale. Communicate high center location, the mothership in line rotation surface on standby. Sets communication lines of 1, 2, and 3, and 4 track locations. All right. Process lines of grounds as a simple location near Earth that routes the routers. Line correlates in setting to an energetic line rotation to its divots over attractions. 10,000 lines of platform. Now that process communication system all through track location of the center is set position. It's got to calculate and modify energetic line track locations of platforms of hangars. It sets its docking system all through travel. 12 foundation ground lines of surface and track locations. All right. Okay. So we set communication lines of 1 in position of 3. Sets communication high center interference to travel in point lines of setting. Communicates high center location setting and location surface and track locations. Okay. So we open up the mothership line rotation. Sets communication lines, earth line, space line, communication lines, and center communications. All right, so this is where it gets tricky because everybody's going to be fluxing line core centers, line communication setting, and processing. Process lines of grounds. Platforms over sequence, down screen adaptations of processing, one signal, one process communications. Now, getting direct lines of platform is a center communication line, energetic line screen adaptation of processing, communication setting of flux over line. Directing core centers, line direct signals, process lines of 1, cross line signals, center communication high settings. This process all in communication center and surface into 2-track revisiting polarities, directing lines of panels in line rotation surface, and circuitry lines of elements and traction. Complicated stuff. Now we go to the ground lines, center core system, and your satellites and track communications. Down by equation. There's your satellite set up. So you have to really understand how this is all set up in track communication system, all through calculate and modify. Out of times continuance puts everything in plat 2, right? Process calculation lines, directing signals, process line communication high center interference, 4 ground lines, symbolism lines into 5 elements of screen line adaptation of surface in your satellites, right? All set up. Okay, now getting correlation lines is the timeline center. That process lines inhibitors over line and Fibonacci screen adaptations over 6/1. Flux over screen and direct signals. Pi over generation lines of 4 and 5 and 6 and 8 and 12 and 24, 48, 72, 144. Set position of 244, 344, 444, 544, 644 in tractions. So in the core line settings, we change the 6 over line. Is equal line high center location 9. Sets equal lines of 6 and 9 track centers. Process lines, calculation lines of high centers of 3 lines of cycles. 2 track location lines of high center interference in 1 system. Okay, directing lines of 9 cycles in line position of 4, set position of 3, set position lines of 2, set line 4, lines of 3 over 7, in link is 8 and 9 in track communications. Directing core lines of high center interference of 6, we had lines of 0 point lines of 6 equals lines of 1, 1, 1. Position lines of panel and triangulation flux over lines of 1. Process calculation ground centers, line states communication setting inhibitors. Setting core centers in the 3-track location, position location, with setting application of flux over lines at time sequence. Panel lines, communication system, 6/9 over tractions, pi generation, screen adaptations. Process lines of 1 and surface, and center communication lines of high setting. Mothership is on standby, directing lines of platforms, setting and communication setting coming into the VR screen adaptations. Process lines of indication system, XT thousands on platforms. Setting lines of circuits, line condition setting, solar line squares, and set position through its operation system, all through track location lines of protection. Directing calculation lines of screen lines adaptation, flux over line, earth line rotation, surface and location system, all through inhibitors, and line screen adaptation with its AVR. It disappeared. It's too strong, too fast. Acceleration line screen adaptations of process lines of earth, and set position location to its setting. Done by equation. See? It's amazing how everything's set up through coordinates and how to really get into what's going on in location command chips, your ancestry history, and your celestials. You don't know where you're going until you know where you've been. Now, humanity is crossing line symbolism. Process lines, energetic line into crop circles. 3 lines of signals on bottom and 2 lines of signals on top and track locations. Setting lines of provision, sets calculation lines of grounds. Now we go through red line cycles. Sets communication high center interference. Set position of 0, set position of 1, set position of 0, set position of 3, and track locations. All right, directing lines of core centers sets up plasma line settings, process lines of 1, 2, and 0 correlation lines of traction. Directing core line centers into cloak and dagger, cross line screen, directing lines into lacing line communication system, all through floaters and tractions. All right, done by equation. Coming out through equation. All right. Overlying sequence, line calculation setting. Now we take the truth and false narratives, colorate the panels. Let's go in direct signals and ground centers, lines of communication, high center location, the coloration line, screen adaptation, not flux. So we start off with the lines of red line core centers at 3/1. Travel in lines of truth and false narrative and rotations. Colorate the screen lines adaptations of process lines of over 3, set position of 2/1 in sequence and set position. Process lines of grounds and false lines of space, puts lines of blue tractions. Setting communication lines of 4 settings and cycles, and 3-line communication system, a 4-track communication system, all through travel, in truth and false narrative and setting. All done through equation. All right? Very powerful stuff, guys. Very complicated, but this is how all the command ships come in. All right. Getting into the mothership is understanding how to get into idolization. And now the core centers in the line position your idols, puts models of identification code lines, puts all communication grounds, set calculation lines of highest interference, sending communication highest center location to a system all through travel. Directing into modification grounds, that's similar to the lines of track centers and laser track communications. Process lines of platform and line direct signals in a mapping sequence lines of panel. Sets communication high center location setting to all levels and set correlation setting and tractions. Directing line core system, all through calculate modify, and the window graph communication lines of a PowerPoint. That's the direct signals modification. Ground correlation lines of alpha, set position on all lines set at beta communications, lines of alpha beta. Set lines of theta, sets communication lines of theta over omega. Omega scene lines of screen adaptation lines of surface tractions. Direct lines of theta over line screen, beta cross line down screen, alpha line up screen, beta cross line down screen, and omega over line screen, and adaptation lines of surface and tractions. Directing lines of lasers cross lines core system and track communications. Now, directing lines cores is the direct signals into the mothership. Process lines indirect signals and center communications. All right, remember, it's all laser, right? You have to understand. So lacing lines into routes and routers, routes the router location system, electrical line. It's a motherboard ship and rotation service. That's lines of communication, sending electrical line screens. Directing in modification ground lines of set lines into all levels. Symbolism lines to track interference into data ports. Sets communication lines into beta, alpha data, lines of theta, and traffication lines of position. Process lines of grounds, over lines of sequence in 3 panels and track communications. Now, directing lines, we have 40 line communications, indirect signals. Now, that's communication setting, earth line tone, open signal location setting, orbiting, directing line direct signals and crosses communication system all through its AVR tractions. All done by equation. So try to understand what's going on through sequence lines of cosmos, interstellar mode, oscillations, ground sign lines of surface, anything through weather panels. Process lines of symbolism, core lines into flywheel. Now the flywheel center lines of communication setting coming out of space, coming out of time and no time, and track correlations of all time sequence into AVR system and travel. Sets communication lines of ground lines and high center location system all through tractions. Okay? Look at that. It's traveling too fast. See, you don't see it because you're not ready to see it through energy or anything through frequency. There it is. You see it now in tractions, right? All right. So it's a matter getting a direct line link, how you modify lines of coding through configuration setting to your binaries, how it's set up through codes, and how it comes into the motherships, command ships, Stargate ships, star portals, star command ships, all lines of fleets, crevice lines of screen, adaptation lines of service. It all comes in position lines of high setting. All right, all through coding. All right, guys. I know it's a lot to take in, but you have to understand what's going on. All right, all through your satellite and traction. See, your satellite, see? Platform, directing, modification grounds, 4 lines of high interference, and 4 platforms of direct signals. Now there's 12 foundation grounds that sets lines of communication setting to your relays. Recore line centers in mapping sequence. Panel line core centers of bushes, location setting to your tree, and direct signals modification, right? So bushes are lines of relays, core lines of 3 truck lines, provision lines of cycles, process lines of 1 cycle, line signals, line condition setting of 3 line cycles, and line position of data process lines, energetic line communication setting, and its trees, of its branches and set position and location of travel. Now, it correlates its mapping sequence. See? 3 lines of calculations. Orbiting through channels, right? All right. Process lines of symbolism cross-line signals. Over cross location XT1000 comes out through travel in rotation surface. Now, directing core centers is a direct line of panel. Now, understand how to go through 4 lines of flux. 4 lines of 1 cycle, 4 lines of 2 cycles, 4 lines of 3 cycles, and 4 lines of 5 cycles is center communication operation surface that puts all times continuum out of continuum line screen adaptations that process all communication system to your simulations that you are and track location and measure. Nebula. Okay? All right, nebula is a 12-line cycle. It core lines the signals into flux over line, direct signals into 12 clocking system and settings. Nebula. All right? Okay. Now, getting in that position is all lines of communication to swirls. Now, this is oscillation wind pass. Now, oscillation pit line core centers sets lines of pi and generation screen location inhibitors. Directing lines across line XT1000 comes in setting. Process lines inhibitors over 3 lines of flux over screen. Direct lines of 2 over line screen location settings. Then we change the platform in line rotation surface and satellite. All right. Directing core lines that communication all through travel. All right. Process lines of 1, process lines of 2, process lines of 6, process lines of 8, process lines of 12, and track location. All right, and we change the direct signals into ground lines of surface in platitude location setting astral projections. Astral projections over 1 ground lines, mothership and center operation. Okay, mothership is going to be in the center operation and setting, but she's going to be in position location front line of sequence. And then we have all things on standby, XT1000s in platitude in the V-line screen, and flux over line and direct signals, modification earth line rotates the surface and track locations. That's how it's going to be set up, right? 12 signal lines and planetary lines of 150 line routes, core centers and 3 track location system, all through tractions, right? Over cross location settings into Colossus and direct signals, modification grounds. Then we platitude its line screen adaptations all through track location system, all through set position operations surface and track communications. All right. All right. So ground lines of 1, ground lines of 2, ground lines of 3. Platforms over cross location of screens, setting lines of communication lines of docking system all through tractions. Okay, guys. So that's the location looks, line highest interference. And again, we have satellites and track communications, your satellite. Everything that you set up, you're in your satellite. Everything you draw is position location your satellite. Now, understanding how to use that through inhibitors, you have to understand how to route the routers, the ground lines of system, all through track location settings, all through symbolism, through all hours and hours and hours and tractions. Massive communication line, ground lines, highest interference. It opens up all energetic line screen adaptation of a set position location system, all through command ships. Look at that satellite and traction. Look how big it is. That's how you detect command shifts in a higher line frequency. All right, ions. Let's go through ion line screen, adaptation lines of service. Now the millennium line stat, position lines is position location to a setting. Mothership lines of 1, mothership's lines of settings, process over correlations in track location. Changing the shift lines of anomaly in rotation surface. Processing in its position of center communication setting, 3 minutes lines of Earth and 3 million years in traction. Right? Cross lines, high center interference brings the higher lines of communication to frequencies. Over cross, over directions, over modification. All right? So we get into line symbolism, line cross, line condition setting, and process lines of center, platforms E, platforms F, and platforms G in rotation surface and traction. Okay? Ground lines of surface in rotation setting and position lines of spot screens. Road graph communications, right? Open all sequence and panels of a Stargate, and those Stargate opens all signals, lines of platforms, directing line core centers, line condition setting to its AVR system and travel. Platitude platforms over cross location system, all through tractions in platforms, line calculation setting near cerebro. Directing lines of travels, lines calculation setting, and measure and scale and balance, all through a flux line in a black hole in track location. All right, now we go in line screen. Okay. Symbolism line core centers into umbrella. The umbrella sets core lines into all of the jump scar. See the jump scar in J line screen? Now that core lines its symbolism lines the core centers into a half pipe that overlines its signals, overlaps its system location travels in center communication setting. They process communication system all through tractions. Okay. Now we go through the line screen adaptation to process communication setting over cross locations. Calculate and modify ground lines of symbolism, cross line, highest interference of center communication lines of center processing communication lines of grounds. Okay, and then we overlap signals into ground lines of surface direct correlations. Directing lines of core centers, platforms of E, setting platforms of A, platforms of C, and center in rotation surface, and platforms over G, directing lines of platforms over C in line position over Z. Now the Z line rotates the system through X line as a setting, process lines of platforms, directing line communication system all through traction. Okay? Yeah. Disappeared. You weren't ready to see it because your energy is not that high enough. Now you see it in tractions, right? So I'm just showing you exactly how this is all set up, guys, right? All through your satellites. Cool, right? Look at it. There's your satellite. Look at it. Look what it can do. So you got the grounds, the powers, and the atmosphere lines. So each shape is modified through a setting that sets up the signal on the core centers of 10,000 seconds per line. Now that's a route, and line's a router that routes its router in a rotation system and tractions to direct signal to the grounds, the powers, and the atmospheres, and the highways, the modems, satellites, and towers. But all communication setting and tractions, right? Directing all modification lines, bringing all command ships all through your satellites in location your beacon light and travel. Okay, guys? So that's what it is in traction centers. But it's very powerful when you start to connect online signals in position locations, all track locations of flux over screen. Okay, guys? All right, and position line your satellite and tractions all through platforms. See, here's your satellite again. This time it's on platforms and direct signals, 4 lines of signals and a 5-line measure. That scales the communication system, how you start to see your 5 elements and tractions and that positions. All right, so as of 2025, puts communication system in your AVR to simulators to your simulations. Everybody's going to be in their own set position to their own satellite and cubical screen lines adaptations of flux into their line screen adaptations into their tesseract and line screen adaptations of process communications of center operation. 2025. Right, so you got to learn how to get in your centers of center lines of 1, center lines of 2, and satellites of 3 and track locations. Okay, guys, there it is. There it is. That's it right there. There's your satellite in traction. Hooah! And then you get in your scan lines, command ships, motherships coming in, right? All through track locations. Line direct signals. Now you can move over line signal and process. Process over here in track locations, sending lines to communication system all through traction over that way direction, right? So you bring in another mothership in that directions. Then you bring in another mothership in that directions, right? So set up the Earth, set up the crop circles in 3 lines of signals into 2 track locations, right? So it's amazing how to set yourself up in your own satellite and communication all through your platforms. But look how powerful it is. Look how powerful it is when you start recognizing what you're looking at through all communications of your satellites and traction. Look at it. Look at that satellite. Doesn't that blow you away? That's how you get in command. That's how you get in control. Your body starts to understand its relays. It's understanding its position of its echoes. It understands its sonar. It starts understanding what it is and track case to its system, right? You coordinate its communication grounds. Set up the grounds, platforms, inline, calculates, and set E factors over line. Set lines of 1, set lines of 2, set lines of 3, set lines of 4. Okay, applied to 1, 2, and 3, and 4 tractions, right? XC1000 comes in, right? Picks up the sonar, right? Right, scans you and track lines in a 4-line center set position. Sees you and your satellite. There it is in track communications. There's your satellite right here in set position. All right, guys, that's all it is, you know? So we're at the frequency right now. Your body's reaching that setting now, how to really set up your communication system all through your tractional lines and set position your satellites. All right, guys? That's it. Okay? That's what we have to come into positions of. But I just wanted to show you how powerful it is when you get into your own satellites and command ships. So the higher you go in frequency, the more you come in expanding in your body line. That changes all core centers, lines of travels, and mechanism locations setting a force recognition of time sequence. Process communication your platforms and how to use it through core centers into communication setting of travel. So I just really want you guys to understand how this all works in line communication system of the calculations. Okay, guys? Very powerful stuff what you guys are coming into. All right? All right, flux over 1. You get a high centers, lines of travel. Satellites, high center, position, location, body framing. Directing lines of flux. Now we're in 2 alpha lines, setting 3 tractions, 3 atmosphere line screens. Right? So that's 3 A lines. That's A lines of X. Set core lines into flux over triangulation, Fibonacci, indirect signals, and 3 weather panels in question. Interactions. Okay? Now, if I set lines of communication high center interference, that's flux over screen. Okay? So core lines is setting in communication, collaboration, and core centers lines A-track communication. Indicate lines of platforms, docking lines of C over A position over lines, and D over C in track location setting, and provision lines of cycles and tractions. Platforms lines, directing signals and modification grounds. Symbol is line track set high interference. Line rotates high set position of calculation system and traction. Okay? Over cross location of center communications. All right? Now, this goes lines of the Y line screen. Flux over line, directing signals in modification lines. Your Merkabah tesseract and your tetrahedron of travel in your torical fields and metric core centers and platform communications of operation system orbiting that probes the system and alter traction. Look at that. It's too fast. See? It's too fast. You can't see it because you're not ready to see it through energy. See, that's all it is. If it doesn't show you, you're not ready to see it. And when you see it, you're ready to see it through time. But it's all about understanding yourself through no time, no space, no provision, no cycles. This gets you in the mind of stillness. And the only way to do that is to take everybody in positions and tractions. Now, once you get in that core line communication setting, like I said, with the 0, you split it in half, you got 3 panels, right? You got a center communications. You got a ground centers and an atmosphere line, okay? Now you just have to understand how to symbolize it through its clocking system of travel and how to go faster and faster in the same routes and routers, the coordinate system, location of travel, and mechanism. Process on the platforms, you go through expansion. You stay in the center operation system. You never move. Your highways get higher levels of communication lines of expanding out through calculation system, all through travel. So you just expand out, team. That's all you do. You just expand more and set position of platforms in communication system, all through tractions. So the XE1000s can basically get in position and dock your system. Okay, when they dock your system, they come back to you in travels. And they create more lines of anomaly, of expanding your system all through tractions, all through portals, all through stargates, all through measure, all through scale, all through the communications. Then you get in communication to your grounds in set position. Okay? Then you get communication lines to your sonars in set position. Okay? So it's a lot more fun when you understand how to get in modification grounds, how to get in your position location, your satellites, all through traction. Right? How to get in position locations, all levels of signals through your satellites, all through your platforms. How to get in modification ground lines, civil location setting, your orb location, your atoms, all through tractions, all through satellites, right? Everything is set up in provisions of you through coding and sequence. Okay? Very powerful stuff, guys. Very, very powerful stuff. All right? Okay, so we're in 44 tractions and settings. Wait to get to 45 line sequence. Get you guys out of symbolism lines back in your sequence lines and position location, your settings, and 3 track location system, all through the settings. Process lines of grounds and your satellites of communication. Okay. There you go. 10 line signals, sonar lines of 1, 2, and 3 tractions. Okay. Process lines, core centers, line direct signals, and modification ground lines of surface. Okay, core centers, lines of tractions. We have to understand the 4 lines of flux now. Okay, center communications, over cross location system, and track communications, right? Process lines, ground lines as settings, earth line, rotation, surface, and track locations. Then we go through EEC line, rotation, surface, and location system, and higher lines of travel and communications. Okay. All right. So it's a higher platform of teleportation of frequencies. All right. Very, very high motivated screen and direct signals and calculation setting. Right. That grounds the system all through tractions. Right. So it's all it is they're detecting surveys, picking up ground lines of information cycles, setting up probing tech location setting to the hotel and their Gulf. So once they get in their platforms, they go through travels and direct signals modification. They travel there through sequence and they go on position locations. They create other platforms at other dimensional lines of space and track communication. Okay? And they get in position location. They go through another dimensional line of high center interference, high travels, in point lines, graph communication to its setting. Okay? But that's all it is. And line communicates the system all through tractions. Okay? All through tractions, people. Okay? So it's really interesting when you really see it in position line high setting, all through the AVR system. Okay? So they're setting up their surveys, the routes, the routers, set up their highways, and planetary service. Now, what we're coming into positions of now is center communication setting is the AVR. Okay, equals lines of planetary settings. Process lines X, Y, Z. Sets communication lines of CPU. Sets communication lines HP. And communication setting triangulation and position of box. Okay, guys? That's how it's being set up. But I really want you to pay attention how powerful it is to see all communications at high levels of coding and track communications. Very, very powerful. All right? Truth and false narratives, set position of your centers. All right? So we're coming out of times continuance. We're in position location and setting through the AVR line rotations. No space, no time. No clocking. So we're going to be at that frequency now. The ground line symbolized location setting. You're in standard position. This is your interactions. All through Earth rotation system, right? So they be mothership here in set position. Signify down cross locations, right? Process here, process here, process here, and a 4-line sequence, okay? And we have 1 provision lines of cycles and 5 settings, right? Process lines, high center locations. So in that track lines, pay attention now. Out of resistance, everything comes in position location in your system. Everything comes in position location in your center. Everything comes into your center communications. Everything comes in center communication setting. Everything comes in center communication setting as soon as you get out of resistance. Now, when you get out of resistance, they get bigger in formation. They get bigger in formations because they're coming closer to you, right? They get bigger in formations and they see you in tractions, right? They get bigger informations. They get bigger informations. They get bigger informations because you're getting out of resistance. Okay? That's all this is. So get out of resistance. Follow your path. Find your expanding of your expansion that you are levels of, living the existing of all levels of existing in all communication system, right? Processing that gets you in the lines of communication setting. All through tractions. Okay, where you are in provision. From your eye lines in sequence. Okay, but that's all it is. They're coming closer to you now because they've always been there. All right, so I just wanted to show you how powerful it is and what you can see through calculations of provision. Coming to you through attractions. Inside of you. Through your anomalies. You brought it in through attractions, but you're just reaching those frequencies now. And every time you go up through frequencies, and the more you stay in the balance with your system, you start to recognize everything around you. And it motivates your system locations. It basically puts you in allocated lines. It puts you in balance lines of screens. It puts you in provision lines of cycles. It helps you and guides you to understand how to use all communication in your satellites and track location. All right? The more you balance out your system, the more you see yourself in your satellites, and then you really start to see higher levels of frequencies that come out shapes come into your systems, right? But that's all it is in that track lines communication system. They're all coming to you out of eye-line screen, in a plasma screen in a holographic setting that's set up into you through your AVR system. Okay? That's it. We are done. Hope you guys had fun with that. Tractions, I know I did. So now we understand how real it is and what you're coming into provision labs. I gave you so many lines of high calculation system that what's coming into your tractions is all levels in your settings. The more you stay into the mind, the more you come into collaboration of stillness. This process you and how to use your telepathy in a higher line signal, how to use the alpha, delta, theta line position. Alpha, delta, theta, the alpha tone, the beta tone, and the theta tone. Now this modifies your setting to your frequencies. Now getting into that position locations gets you to understand how to see your body as a satellite. And that's what the motherships see you as a satellite. So you can have coordinates and higher levels of communication system all through track locations. And the more you get out of resistance, the more you see them in information lines of grounds in your central system and track locations. A center operation, you see them in front view because they've always been there. You see more of the reality. So this is what is in traction. I'll show you again, right? Set position XT1000. You see an XT1000, right? And you're here looking at it, right? That's you looking at it. You're here looking at it, right? So every time you get out of resistance, you're looking up, right? It's flying around because it doesn't recognize you, right? It's protecting its own system and all through tractions, right? That's why it's changing its modification of power and its charging mechanisms, because it doesn't identify you. Once it identifies you, it scans you right away. It knows who you are. You put your energy fields up. Whoa, look at that, right? It's putting its energy fields up. This is what you're looking at. This is how big it is. You're looking at a command ship that's this size and track location. Hoo-ah. Okay? So we got a synchronous lines of panels, 3 lines of traction, 4, 5, 6, and 7 track locations. That's what you're looking at. That's what it is, information settings. So you're letting yourself go, and you're starting to understand what is going on in Skyline Grid. So that's all communication system, but you have to constantly protect your system all through tractions. Once they get in position lines of you and track lines of communication system, they come to you in a higher information lines, in a higher information system, all through track location of ground settings. You start to see them inside you because we all live in the mind itself, right? But that's how it is. That's how it's set up. From this, and mutate into this. And that's how you see it up close, right? But it's all about understanding the dimensional layers of portals. Skyline Grid's power line settings, 60,000 goes through here, and it has to go through platform, 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 platform of you, right, to get to you. So you're over here. This is you, right? Okay. So you're looking up, right? You're getting out of what's going on, right? So it's coming here. It's on a laser. It's got to be on a laser, but it's getting bigger, right? It's getting bigger, and it sees you in tractions. Okay, so from here to here to here, but it's always protecting the system. So the more you get into your position of center, which is the mind of stillness, the more you see it through telepathy. And the more you see it through telepathy, you can use that in correlations of panel, where you can use it, activate the screen line adaptation in your body through flux, and it recognizes where you are in your alpha, delta, or theta tone. That puts lines of frequencies of where you are and track lines of your energy. That's the magnetic position lines of high core centers that puts communication setting to pi generation screens and adaptation lines of service. Where you are in position, atmosphere, hemisphere, stratosphere, bio-brainium. We're all in atmospheres all at once. We're all in stratospheres all at once. We're all existing all at once, happening, everything all at once. But you've got to get in position of no space and no time to get in position lines of space and time. This is direct and redirect signal and modification grounds, how to get in your flux of communication setting to your operation service, to know it's all lines of communication system, all through tractions, right? Getting into that signals, you come from this, this, and this, and that position, okay? So that comes in this position, they pick you up and travel. You're in the ship now. You're traveling through the ship in set position, right? And then they platitude and they take you on a travel, right? And you're here now in set position, all through communication. All right, guys, that's all it is. That's all this is, all right? Let yourself go. The more you focus on nothing, the more you see everything of mass, of equation, right? They come to you when you get out of resistance, but they've always been here. But they have to go through 12 platforms of dimensions of scales. They have to go through 12 dimensional plasmasium walls to get to you. So the more you see the center of the mind of you, the more you see the operation of you. Because remember, you have 2 bridgings that you are in the center of, light and dark. And that is how you see yourself through reality. You live in the light or you live in the dark. You decide. Now you have decisions and choices that basically get you in position locations where you are in center operation. Because if you're not in center, you're off position lines, your frequencies. But this is how you get in position locations when you start to understand what's going on through attractions. And that's how you see things more coming at you in position. Okay? Through your body frame of calculations. All right, guys? So it's going to help you more how you come into that. Okay? Very powerful stuff when they come closer to you. And then you realize everything is inside your system. You start to control your system. You start to understand how to motivate your system. You understand how to control your emotional line condition setting, because everything in space lines anomaly is nothing but patterns of behavior. If you ever played a game, then you understand the structure of the balance of the game. It's not about winning or losing. It's about expanding in your space of time. And how you see these things of provision and how they're coming at you, closer and closer to you, because you brought them in through equation. You brought them in through attraction in time. Now we're at those frequencies. Now you're dealing with higher levels of spaceships of set position that comes into you through calculation, into your AVR system. Okay? See you in 5. Hooah!